Los Angeles, none of us are attorneys. And so the things that Gail and I are going to be sharing with you today are things that we've learned from others along the way. I will say that in several of the past presentations that we've done, we've actually had some of the top LPS attorneys from Orange County chiming in, or at least watching the presentation. And they reported to me afterwards that everything that we said was accurate. So we feel pretty confident that the information that we're providing you today is accurate. However, it's just a guideline for you to choose from to say, that sounds like something that I would like to pursue on my own. So we're not attorneys, and we're not telling you what to do. We're just sharing information, and you can use it as you think it's best. So that going forward, want to thank NAMI Urban Los Angeles, Araceli, and others. If we can get this slide up, Araceli, I would really like to start on that first slide. And we'll go to slide 2. Go ahead.
Yeah, Jim, I can just mention, Liliana McCoy is a public guardian conservator, and she's joining us to help us out. And if there's a lot of questions that the public guardians do or don't do, she is here to be able to help us if we need any of those questions. Okay.
So we're going to jump to slide 2 and then 3. Yeah, so here I was going to point out that Liliana McCoy was from the Department of Mental Health Office of the Public Guardian. So thank you, Gail, for jumping in there and getting that straight, because we want people to reach out to her if they have any questions regarding this. Next slide, please. So as I was saying, we really appreciate Maddie Cobbs, Harold Turner, and Araceli is our webmaster who's working behind the scenes today to make all this happen. And Mr. Turner is also with us. He's the president of NAMI Urban Los Angeles. And I just am so overwhelmed at their willingness to put this on, every year. And it's so helpful to families. And I can't thank you guys enough for doing this. Let's go to slide 4. And I've made my disclaimers, so let's try 5. There we go. This is a tip that we always share with people. Whenever your loved one is in the hospital, or you're talking to their primary care physician or their psychiatrist or anyone else about your conservatee, refer to yourself as the conservator. Don't say, I'm so-and-so's dad or so-and-so's mom. You say, I'm so-and-so's conservator. That really sets a precedent as to what you're able to do legally, and that you're in full control, and that you're able to have access to all the information. Also, another tip is to please take advantage of the free NAMI to NAMI, family to family classes. They will go over medications, really, teach you how to find resources in the community. They explain what mental health issues are all about and how to cope with them. And it's just an invaluable resource. So if you haven't done it yet, please take advantage. Certainly, NAMI Urban Los Angeles presents those. So please take advantage of them. Or if you're not here in LA, go to your nearest NAMI and chime in with that. We're going to talk about keeping journals, not only here, but later in the presentations. And we're going to suggest that I think, should be separate journals for medications, your observations of how your loved one is settling in with their medications. Does it seem to be working well? Does it provide the necessary level of clarity of mind and so forth? And also really important, and I've learned this just this last week, I did a poor job of keeping track of the persons that I spoke with from the Behavioral Health Care Agency here in Orange County. And it's really important to do that. Anytime you make a phone call, put down the date, phone number you called, who you're talking to, get their name, and then have your conversation, so that at some later point in time, if somebody says, well, who did you talk to about this? You'll have that information. Otherwise, you say, well, I don't know, with somebody, and you're not going to have a good outcome without that. So also get involved with the mental health arena, whether it's politically or the NAMI to NAMIs, the NAMI walks. Get involved in all these services that are there to really help you with your loved one. Next slide, please. Yeah.
LPS conservatorship. The LPS conservatorship is a specific term that's used in California for involuntary mental health treatment. It's named after Latimer Petrus in short, who were legislatures. They started working on it in the late 60s, and it was finally made law in 1974. And it's the guides, it's in the California Welfare and Institutions Code 5200 plus. If you want to read that code, go right ahead. I suggest it when the nights that you have insomnia, good time to read it. These laws are over 50 years old, and they really don't reflect the current scientific research that we have for treatment and recovery, which is unfortunate. They should be updated, but they're not. And the implementation of these laws has changed over time. The way the laws are written, they're not bad, but we don't implement them the way that they are written. In other words, you shouldn't have to be fighting to get your loved one in treatment, but you do. You fight every step of the way. As every one of you who has somebody under conservatorship, you know it was a battle. Next slide. When you got your conservatorships in Los Angeles, they should have given you a booklet helping your loved one, a family guide to conservatorship and involuntary treatment. If you did not, download it from the internet. That has all the forms that you need. If you're leaving the state, it has a form in there. If you need to switch conservators, it has a form in there. If your loved one wants to drive and you feel that they're ready to drive the car, it has the form to get that done. For renewing the conservatorship, it really has everything in there. So I strongly suggest that you download that. It's not a very big pamphlet, but it's enough that can answer a lot of your questions. Next slide. The essence of your conservatorship is it mandates medication. And this is really important because the medication provides the chemicals in the brain so that brain, those neurons can connect properly, rather than a neuron connecting to the wrong neuron that sends the wrong message. They start to connect properly. Your loved one will start to get clarity of thinking. And that's your job as conservator to work with the doctor to find the best medication that gives the most clarity of thinking with the least side effects. If a doctor says they're going to prescribe 13 psychotropics, find another doctor. That's a quack. If they're giving you medications, and I've had people call me a year later after being under the conservatorship, and the person can't think clearly. And my first question is, what medication is he on? And when they tell me those are medications, in my opinion, that are good for a person with mental health problems, not a person who has a serious mental illness. So it's really important to know their medications, keep it in that journal, know what they're doing. And when you're keeping that journal, anything your loved one says, do not correct them. Write it down. That is your key to finding out where their mind is. If you start correcting them and saying, well, that's not real and this and that, they're going to clam up and you won't know what they're thinking. It's important for you to know where their mind is on their recovery journey. Because if you don't know where they are, you're not really going to be able to help them that much. Next slide. There are two types of conservatorship. You've probably been given the conservatorship of the person. And if you're not the conservator, the public guardian probably is. And that's work well with your public guardian. Understand you're dealing with one person, they're dealing with like 50, sometimes 75. So be respectful of their time. Emailing is usually the best because they can get to those emails better. If they have to call you, they will. But if you do talk to them, limit your conversation. Be very specific what you need to know. Get on the phone and get off. Otherwise, they're not going to want to talk to you a whole lot. But they're very good and very helpful. And write down everybody you talk to, what they're telling you. That's important. Now, there's a conservatorship of the estate. If your loved one owes student loans, and you can get student loans totally waived. There's a way to do that so that they don't have to pay them. Debts, you can work to pay 10 cents, 25 cents on the debt, or not pay it at all, because after 3 years, it's going to be off their record. There are a few things that you can do. If you have criminal court cases, that's most helpful. If they have legal problems that you're dealing with, it's most helpful. If you didn't get it when you got the conservatorship, you can request to go to the court and ask the judge so that you can be conservator, and ask the judge to assign you an attorney, somebody who can help you through all this maze for the year. And the court does. They're very good about that. Next slide. Succession of conservatorship.
This is Liliana's.
Pardon?
This is Liliana's slide.
Quiet. Go ahead, Liliana.
Oh, no, it's okay. It's okay. I know you know, when you're in a role.
Oh, no, we want to work you too.
Okay. So, like LPS conservatorship usually begins with the public guardian doing the investigation. And during that investigation, if we find that family members, friends, somebody outside of the public guardian is able to be the conservator, we would recommend them. However, in the course of the conservatorship can be switched from the public guardian to any person. We just need someone who is willing and able to follow through, be responsible with the timelines, such as filing the renewal of conservatorship. We can petition the court to have that person appointed. It's not hard for us to do. We would prefer for family members to do it if they can, and we can certainly file that petition. Another way for a family member to become the conservator, like at some point changes their mind and now wants the responsibility, they can also write a letter to the court, letting the court know that they're interested, and then the court would then order us, the public guardian, to do an investigation of that person to see if they're appropriate. Usually the court will honor the conservatee's requests. They work with the public defender to have us do those investigations, and they're usually granted. Can we change the slide? Oh, perfect. Thank you. So one of the pros in having the public guardian be the conservator is that we work with the intensive care division through the Department of Mental Health in placing clients in locked mental health facilities. They're very difficult to get a conservatee into. Again, it's less stress on the family members in working with ICD to place the client in a locked facility. Again, one of the negatives is that the family member is not really going to have a say in how the person receives the mental health treatment, because the public guardian has the authority to make treatment decisions. Again, public guardian is the one who is able to decide, along with the treatment team, what medications the client will be taking. Family members, we welcome their input because they've dealt with clients, for most of their life. They know what works, what doesn't, but they won't get a say in what medication their loved ones take. So it's always nice to have a working relationship with the public guardian if the family member chooses not to be the conservator, because they can give us all that collateral information that we can use to relay to the treatment team to help in the recovery process.
So Lillian and I are both going to handle this together. So why don't you take the first 3 and I'll take the last 4. How's that sound?
Sure. So if the family member chooses to become the conservator, then you will have the authority, based on the letters of conservatorship, to have all the direct communication with the doctor, the treatment team, nursing, the facility. So you would be the one to make all the decisions along with the treatment team and how your loved one gets treated. You can also reject facilities that you think are not appropriate for your loved one. Sometimes, I'm pretty sure a lot of you have probably dealt with this when they're at the hospital and then the hospital wants to release them to a boarding care. Not appropriate because they're still not very stable. They still need more structure. You as the private conservator can deny that placement and have them look for other more suitable placements. The same goes with medication. So you as a private conservator, you are the one who can decide where the client gets placed. One of the negatives is if it's a family member, child, they know how to use that emotional manipulation to get them out of facilities that they need to be at. So those are, that seems to be the most hard one to overcome, because obviously you love your son, you love your daughter. You don't want to see them hurting or miserable. So a lot of times you might give in and remove them from a place that they should be.
So on the last one, it's really funny. I'm looking at this and I'm counting lines, 3 on top, 4 on bottom. It's 2 and 2, isn't it?
Yes.
So funny. I'm laughing at myself.
I'm sorry.
No. I was saying that there's 3 and then 4. I don't know what I was thinking. But the other thing too is that as the conservator, oftentimes the hospital is going to try to push around and discharge your family member to a facility not appropriate for their level of treatment that is needed for their recovery. And you just need to, so the pressure's on you. That's the negative. But you just need to stand your ground with that because you are, after all, given that legal capacity to do that. And I just want to, for the last couple of people that came in at the beginning of this program, I just wanted to point out what we said a little bit earlier is that the disclaimer is that Gail and I are not attorneys. It's information that we've accrued along the way, and we're sharing that with you today. Next slide. Gail, you want to take the first part?
Okay. Liability for the conservator. By law, the California Welfare and Institutions Code 5358.1 says that you are not liable either civilly or criminally for anything you do for the conservator, anything that you do or don't do, any debts that they accrue, you're not liable. But you're responsible. In other words, when you got the conservatorship, most likely they took away the right for the person to drive the car. If you give them the keys to the car and say, could you run to the store and get some milk for us? And they have an accident, in that case, you are liable because you're negligent. But let's say they stole the keys and went to the store and got into an accident. Now you're not liable. So you have to be careful. In the state of California, you do not want a guardianship. A guardianship means you would be liable for finances, anything they do or don't do. With your conservatorship, you are not. So any debts they accrue, you're not responsible. You're not responsible for any of this stuff, but you should try to pay off their debts if possible, not with your own money, with theirs. You have the right to call the creditor and say, hey, they have this debt, they're under conservatorship. You'll have to send them the papers for them to talk with you, and they're not able to pay it. And that would stop a lot of the letters from coming through. Now, on debts, if the creditors are not willing to work with you, then just don't worry about it. Don't stress about it. After 3 years, those judgments go off their credit report. Okay, Jim, you want to add anything?
Yeah, a lot of times what you'll find is that when your loved one is put into the hospital, if necessary, there's all those forms that you have to sign. And they're going to, have you sign the part where you're responsible for the expenses that are incurred. And I should get compensated by the Pintel Corporation because I'm always pushing their pins. They have some of the finest tip pins on the market as I have here today. And I would really recommend that you buy a special pin from Pintel with a needle point 0.03 in a blue ink because it will really stand out. And when it comes time for you to sign that, you can sign it, but then you put a disclaimer in there that per California law, you are not personally, and that's the key word, underline that, you are not personally liable for the debts incurred in the treatment that the hospital's providing. You just put it in your own words, and that you will pay as funds are available from your payee's account. And just write that in there. And then that just exempts you. That way they can never come back and say, well, wait a minute, you have to pay this. No, we have insurance and so forth and so on, but I'm not personally liable. You've shared that with everybody. I just wanted to share that with everybody. The next slide.
Well, I'm going to add to that. You mentioned
Go
that.
ahead.
Any contract that you're signing, especially for your loved one, if you're signing a contract and you ask a question and they answer it and they say, well, this is our practice, we don't do that, but it's not in the contract, and they say, well, we don't need it in the contract because this is what we do, write it down in that contract. That contract is between the two people, and it's an understanding of what is taking place. So don't hesitate to write it down, initial it, and have them initial it and sign it, because otherwise they can come back and say, we never said that. And believe me, people do. So be sure to write in those contracts when they're going to an IMD or a board and care or any place, and you have a contract, write in there that any change in medication, treatment, and placement must have your expressed permission before they're allowed to do any of that. Otherwise, they take them off medicine, they change medicines. You have no idea what's going on, and you have no idea why your loved one's acting out. But they've either taken them off the medication and put them on another one, and you have no idea. They are supposed to to advise you or to work with you on this, but some facilities, they don't. And when you sign their contract, as far as they're concerned, you've just signed your conservatorship over to them.
Right.
So
Can I mention one thing to you?
Yes.
If when you sign, you might want to add that your name as the conservator, court-appointed conservator for your child. So that way they know that you're not acting as a parent, you're acting as the conservator.
Oh, excellent.
Good point.
Thank you. Next slide.
Okay. So rights and responsibility of the LPS conservator. So you have the authority. And it's just amazing to me. I had somebody call me from our behavioral health care agency here in Orange County, said that they were wanting to talk to my son. And I said, well, I'm his conservator. Well, I can't talk to you. I want to talk to him. I said, I'm his conservator. She said, well, I'm not approved. I said, okay, so when you get approval, call me back. You have every right to know why they were wanting to talk to somebody before they engage in a conversation with them. but you have the power to approve or disapprove of all medications, treatment, and placement. On medications, you want to be very careful. Medications that either the primary psychiatrist for your loved one, or if they're hospitalized, they have their doctors as well. I think we just switched a slide or something. But you have the authority to not approve of any medication that the doctor prescribes, but you want to be very careful that you have a good reason for that. Otherwise, your doctor can take that to court and primarily ask the court, because they're the professional and they're the doctor and they've been doing this and so forth, that you're getting in the way of your loved one's treatment, and you're asking that your conservatorship be null and void, and that can happen. So you always want to work with the doctor, and always, talk with the doctor and say, well, I think we've not had good success with that, so I would like to talk to you about maybe some alternative medications. Also, when the hospital goes to discharge, you have the right to go to wherever it is that they want to place him and inspect it to make sure that their services, you want to ask them what kind of services they provide. You want to make sure that not right across the street from a bar or a pot house or that type of thing. You want to make sure that this is an appropriate placement. So they can't just arbitrarily take your loved one out of the hospital and ship them off someplace. They have to first get your approval as the conservator. And I see hospitals all the time. I have so many families that call me and say, gee, I booked them into UCI, and next thing I know, even with conservators, and they didn't talk to me, they just shipped my son or my daughter off to so-and-so. You need to talk to them about that. I will tell you that families have actually called their game on that and have them bring them back to the facility. So just know that you have that sort of authority. Next slide.
Well, let me just add on the placement. When you go to these facilities, have a list of questions that you put together. You want to be sure in that facility, you want to know what treatment they do, how often they communicate with the families, or that they have family meetings that on their progress, their recovery progress. You want questions like on sex, because that is not in the California Welfare and Institutions Code where you can control them on that. So you want to know what precautions they take and what they do should your loved one want to have sex. You don't want them to go to an IMD and you end up coming out as a grandparent. So there are questions that you want to ask to every facility so that you can compare them. And don't look at the type of facility. You do want it to be clean, but a lot of them are old. Look at what they do, what treatment. And many times when you go to an IMD, especially if it's your first time, you're going to look at people and you're going to go, my child's not like that. Well, they probably were when they were very ill. And when they go to that facility in 2 months' time, you're going to see those people that you were thinking were really kind of strange. They've gotten on medication. I mean, it's a world of difference for those people. And as they get better, of course, they leave. And what do? They bring in the ones that are ill. So when don't look at the clientele, because that is why they're there, is to get on the road to recovery. Okay, next slide.
So, go ahead, Cal.
Okay, conservators have the right to speak directly with the treating doctor. And when you go to those facilities, ask, does this allow me to speak with the treating doctor? Because there are times you can go through the social worker most of the time, but there are times you have to speak with the treating doctor. And if they say, well, we don't do that in this facility. Oh, yes, they do. You are the conservator. Would you send your 5-year-old in to go see the doctor and the doctor not communicate with you? I don't think so. And that's the same with this. So you want to talk specifically with the doctor. You also want to be sure that they have services or resources available: SSI, SSDI, Medi-Cal, and Medicare. Now, when you can apply for SSI, any of those, you can apply if you are the conservator. Before you're conservator, if you use the word apply with Social Security, that is a 5-letter dirty word to them, and they'll hang up on you. But once you're conservator, you sign for the paper, because they have taken their right to enter contracts away. They've given that right to you. So you do that. By the way, they can have private insurance, Medi-Cal, and Medicare all at the same time. And if a facility is saying you have to get rid of your private insurance, the private insurance will pay for it, and then Medi-Cal is state, and Medicare is federal. They would pay the copay, so you shouldn't be paying for anything. Jim, you want to add to this?
Liliana, did you have anything you wanted to add into this?
Yes, I just want to, I don't know, I'm sorry, I can't remember if it has been mentioned, but just please make sure that the facility has the letters of conservatorship that directly names you as a conservator, and that is also in their medical chart. So when the doctor does go to the facility and, reviews a chart, they see there that you are the conservator and that the person is under conservatorship.
Okay. I think we've pretty well covered this.
Yeah, I just want to add one more thing. If a public guardian is a conservator and you believe the medication is all wrong for your loved one because they're not getting on the road to recovery, ask the conservator, the public guardian, if they could request a medication review. And they should be able to do that. And that would give them a better idea where they are on that medication. I mean, so if somebody's on 5 psychotropic medication, which one's working? You want to know which one works. Okay, that's it. Next slide.
Let's start that off, Gail.
Go ahead. Oh, you want me to? Okay.
Sure, why not?
The California Welfare Institutions Code 5358.5 is a really important code for you to know the law. You guys are learning the law, so people can't pull the wool over your eyes. As a conservator, you have the right to hospitalize your loved one when you think it's necessary. You do not have to wait for them to decompensate to harm to self and harm to others, or to become, that gravely disabled where they're not eating and things like that. If your loved one decides, I'm not going to take the medicine anymore, and you've tried for about a week to get them to take that medication, you have the right to put them back in the hospital to get that medication restarted. And that is really important, because the sooner you do it, the less they may just have to go to the hospital, take the medication, and they can leave. If you wait longer, they might have to do a little R&R for the weekend. And if you wait a long time and they have really decompensated, then they might have to be in the hospital for, a couple weeks, a month, who knows? You want to do this right away, not the next day. If they say, I'm not taking it today, maybe not the next day. But that is your right as conservator. The courts have said they are gravely disabled, and no one has the right to go against that. They can take it to court and say, no, they're not gravely disabled. I don't know of anybody who's going to do that. So because the court has deemed that they are gravely disabled, nobody can go against that, because that is contempt of court. You really don't want to wait for that person to decompensate. When you go to do this, the police don't know all the laws. So contact Marion Brown. You can call me. I'll help you with it. They have a deputy for emergency outreach and triage. That's what she is, and that's what her people do. They can line it up so that the police can go and transport your loved one to the hospital. or call an ambulance and have the ambulance transport to the hospital. We used to have to go to the police department, give them a copy of our conservatorship, a written letter saying that we deem it's necessary that they go to the hospital, and a copy of the law. We don't have to do that anymore. Marion Brown is very aware of this, and she's taken over it. Now, don't call her Friday afternoon because she doesn't work on the weekends. If you've known this is going on, do it during the week so that they can get the people out there. Jim?
Yeah, primarily here in Orange County, they have a funny approach on this. I've talked to the individual that's actually in charge of the CAT team. And when they come out to see someone, even though I've had this conversation with them that, we have this right to hospitalize somebody as a conservator when I deem it necessary. And of course, that authority stops at the door. Once they go into the hospital, then that's up to the hospital staff and the doctor to determine how long they're going to hold him. But if you feel that they need to be hospitalized and they're here in Orange County and they're not feeling that they're meeting criteria, call me. I have made some in-grounds or in-ways with the CAT team. And I'll call the gentleman that is actually in charge of the CAT team and have conversations with this individual. I'll try to help you out the best I can. But we want to do this while the CAT team is still at the house. And you just say, well, if they say we're not going to transport, just say, well, I believe that I have the right to have him transported and I'm asking you to assist. Would you wait while I talk to Jim Farrell and he's going to talk to your director of the CAT team? And I'll help you in any way I can to try to get your loved one the treatment that they need. But ultimately, it's going to be up to the director that's actually in charge of the CAT team itself. But just know that you have that right. I'm seeing some discrepancies in the law and what our county CAT team believes, and it's frustrating. But anyway, my number is in the chat room for those of you that are asking what my number is. Okay, next slide. So go ahead.
Okay, we pretty much said this that by decree, the court said your loved one is gravely disabled. If you request a police transport, they might give you trouble because they don't know that law. Right. That's why it's easier to call Marion Brown if you're in Los Angeles. Call Jim if you're in Orange County. He's got the connections, let me tell you. The hospital is the only place where medication can be forced. But once they're on their medication and they start getting clarity of thinking, then when they go to these treatment facilities, they tend to continue their medication. So that is really important. Therapy, cognitive therapy, so that you can exercise the brain is also very important for your loved one to help them to get back to where they were before they got ill. And that's your target goal. Go look at that photo album. What were they before they got ill? Shoot for that as close as you can possibly get. Jim?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was distracted by the chat room. Yeah, I really don't have anything I'm going to add to that, Gail. I think you've covered it pretty well.
Gail, can I mention something real quick?
Please,
yes,
jump in anytime.
If your loved one decompensates, you might want to find out if there's, because they're not taking medication, you should definitely find out whether or not the medication that is being given orally, if they have an injectable for that, because that can help with the decompensation in the future.
Oh, definitely. Those injections are wonderful. Thank you, Liliana. Okay, for those of you who want Jim's phone number, 714-266-8324. Don't you love it, Jim?
I just put it up in the chat.
Oh, you did? Thank you.
I'm easy. I'm a pushover.
Okay, next.
Okay, I'll take, yeah, this is, CalAble is a state-run agency, and the design on this is that the CalAble agency is a place for you to put money in to build up money for different expenses down the road. And those expenses can be paid for without losing your government funding. For example, if you're purchasing certain items for your loved one while they're on Social Security, and Social Security gets wind of that, and however way they could do that, they will actually then penalize you for that and take funds back out from your loved one's monies. But with CalAble, it allows you to actually provide quite a few things through this agency of CalAble. It's a savings account, and you can put the monies in there, and those monies will accrue over time. You can ask them to invest those monies in different ways while those funds are in there. The funds can be used, immediately, or they can be used after your passing and work in conjunction with a special needs trust. And some of the things that you can do is actually spend money on education, books. I'm not going to read the entire list because it's on the website, but you can pay for things like rent. You can buy a primary home for your conservatee, the expenses of maintaining that home. If they need funds for using mass transit, or even purchasing a car for them, you can do all of that without jeopardizing the funds that they're getting from Social Security. There's a whole list of educational support. You can pay for health insurance. You can have computers, adaptive equipment to go with that, and you can go so far as to provide funeral or burial expenses. And that's just some of the things. So what I think we really need to put across to you is that go there, look at that, know that they charge to take care of those funds for you. Just keep that in mind when you talk to them. They actually have their phone numbers. You can ask lots of questions. Find out how much it's going to cost for them to maintain those funds. And then compare that with a special needs trust, because you can provide things through a special needs trust as well without penalizing their government benefits. So these are areas where you can actually help your loved one with their needs either now. One of the things that I looked at CalAble for was there was a boarding care that was a lot more expensive than the normal boarding cares. And in order to put our family member there, I had to pay extra funds. And they were kind of shuffling the receipts around to cover that. But primarily, you can supplement the boarding care expenses through a CalAble account. You can use it immediately and not penalize the cash flow that's coming in through Social Security. I believe in transparency and doing everything in accordance to law. So this is a way that you can do that. But then also you want to look at Amazon or other places. Look for Kevin Urbach. It's his last name is spelled Urbatsch, Urbach, or Special Needs Trust. Just Google that in Amazon, and you'll find all these books that will educate you about Special Needs Trust. And for any of you in Orange County, I can actually refer you out to several different individuals that actually provide Special Needs Trust, some of which are quite expensive and some are not quite so expensive in comparison. So you want to look at providing funds. One of the upshots of having somebody that may have a birth defect, or maybe they have a Down syndrome or something like that, and those are covered under a different type of conservatorship, is those families know almost day one that, hey, we need to start saving some funds up for our loved ones so that when we're gone, there'll be funds to take care of them. With mental health, because it happens in late teens or early 20s, sometimes later, we don't have that often. We've lost all those years that we can leverage our funds to grow some funds to help care for our loved ones. So I recommend that you look at all those things. Special Needs Trust, again, you can call me. You've got my number. I'll give you that information and referrals and so forth. I do not take any kickbacks from anybody. So I just like to refer people out to good resources. Okay, next slide. Use Cali Bill funds, and I've covered, again, these are some of the different areas that you can utilize funds without jeopardizing your Social Security benefits. Next slide. Yeah.
Conservatorship of the estate, and I kind of mentioned a little bit of this earlier. You can negotiate debts with the creditors, and they tend to work with you on that. 10 cents on the dollar, 25 cents on the dollar. Hey, they're happy to get anything. But be sure when you do that, you tell them, I'm writing you a check, and I want a note from you stating that this debt has been paid in full. You don't want to send them a check for 25 cents and they go, but you still owe 75 cents. So you want that note from them that this was paid in full. You can handle criminal court cases. You can acquire a waiver for school loans. And usually that waiver, they cannot make but so much money for 3 years, and then that school loan is gone. You can cancel credit cards, CARDS. We keep forgetting to correct that. But you can cancel their credit cards because some people, they think they're financial wizards. You know how they'll send you, if you sign here, you get $1,000. They'll sign it, send it in, get their $1,000. They get another one, sign here, you get $1,000. And they're rolling in, and they pay a little bit to Peter, Paul, and Mary. And now they owe like $30,000 in these $1,000 credit cards. So you can cancel those. Next slide.
Also, I just would like to chime in on, if you write a check to negotiate a debt, you can, on the back side of the check, write that depositing or cashing this check is in agreement that all debts owed to date are null and void. Something of that language.
I didn't know that. That's a very good one. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah.
Next slide.
So when Public Guardian begins the investigation for conservatorship, we try to find out all the medical problems that the clients may have, because we are not allowed to consent to any medical treatment, any invasive medical treatment. So we can only get authorization for non-invasive, meaning if they have diabetes, then we can consent to diabetes medication. The reason for that is because the clients still retain the ability to make certain decisions for themselves, including medical treatment, which is why we need to petition the court to give us consent. And this is for any invasive, even flu shots, we have to get consent for. Because the clients need to understand the risks and benefits, we need to ask the treatment doctor and treating psychiatrist to complete some forms for us listing the procedure, the outcome, any future problems, so that we can present this to the court to get the consent. And this also applies to private conservators. Can we move to the next slide?
Yeah, if I can add to that, if you're taking your loved one in for dental procedures, if there's an invasive procedure for the dental, you need court permission. And that's not a big deal to get. You just request to go to the court, and they pretty much always give it unless it's experimental. But go ahead, Liliana.
Right. There are some times where your loved one may not want the procedure. They're able to contest it. And if that's the case, then we have to notify the doctor who could potentially need to testify as to why your loved one may need the procedure. All the requests need to be approved by Judge Jaskell in Department 103. I don't know if if you guys have been aware, there's a emergency use authorization medication approved for COVID. We can't approve that. We've had a lot of our clients get COVID and the doctors are trying to prescribe this to them. This is considered experimental because it hasn't been fully FDA approved. So this would have to go through the courts if the doctors want to prescribe this. Same thing goes for birth control. The clients must agree to take it. If not, if it's absolutely necessary for our female clients to get on birth control, we have to ask the court for consent.
Liliana, let me go back and ask you on that. The
Sure.
COVID shot.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to take the COVID shot, or
No,
they are?
The COVID shot, yes. We provide the facilities with our vaccine form. The doctor completes it, they return it back to us, and then we file it with the court. What I'm referring to is, I think it's called Paxlovid. It's a medication given to clients who get COVID as a treatment, because it's not 100% FDA approved. It's only emergency use only. We cannot consent to that.
Oh, okay. What about the other ones that they have? They have other Remdesivir or something like that. Are those acceptable? Because those aren't experimental.
If they're FDA approved and it's recommended, then yes. But if it's not FDA approved, emergency use only, then no.
Oh, okay. That's good to know.
Right. We've started dealing with more requests for that particular treatment, and we've had to say no, that it needs to go through the court if they want to move forward with it. They usually don't, because when we petition the court, there is a delay in getting the petition heard, and that particular medication needs to be taken within a certain time period.
Oh, okay. And another question, if it's an emergency, then you don't have time to get the court approval, that's okay, is that correct?
Then they must document it. I'm sorry, that's I was going to refer to that. If an emergency arises and we do not have time to get the consent from the court, then the facility or the hospital needs to use their emergency protocols to move forward with that procedure. They need to document it very clearly, what is needed, what was done, and have 2 doctors sign off that it was emergent.
Oh, okay.
So there is an alternative, but it needs to be well documented.
Okay, thank you. Conservatorship of the estate. Basically, you can handle your court cases. We kind of went over this earlier. Pay and negotiate debts, request student loans be discharged. You can ask the court to appoint you an attorney should you have questions or need help during the year. Now, when the person's in the hospital, it is not the treating doctor, when they're getting the conservatorship, who requests for you to have conservatorship of the estate. They only request it of the person. When they send the information to the public guardian and you're working with the public guardian who's doing the investigation, you could tell them at that time that you would like the conservatorship of the estate, and they can investigate. I suggest you run a credit report, because that way you'll know what their debts are. And then you can give it to the public guardian, and they can help you get the conservatorship of the estate. But let's say you've gotten the conservatorship of the person, you didn't know you needed it of the estate, and a month goes down the road and you go, I really need this. You can request from the court directly to have the conservatorship of the estate. You cannot have a conservatorship of the estate without the conservatorship of the person. You have to have the conservatorship of the person to have that conservatorship of the estate. Okay, next slide.
As a conservator, you have the absolute right to have contact with the doctor, the social worker, nursing staff, anything related to your loved one. That's the primary purpose of the conservatorship, that you're able to be involved with your loved one's treatment. So you can definitely ask for medical notes, chart notes, anything that your loved one is being treated for. If the doctor or anybody is refusing to give you that information, especially if they're at a DMH contracted IMD, call Dr. Ruiz and let them know that the facility is refusing to provide you with information as a court-ordered conservator.
Criminal court case. You can ask a public defender to request that DMH court linkage program be involved in this case. And there's a pamphlet that we wrote that you can get that off of Urban LA, NAMI Urban LA, which gives you a lot of this information, including all these phone numbers. The resource numbers are really valuable. You should have those available to you. The court linkage program should be involved in that case. And as a conservator, you can request the public guardian, the public defender, have them involved in the case. They have a jail diversion programs for misdemeanors and felonies. And many times on those jail diversion programs, that at the end of doing that work and working on those programs, the case can be completely dismissed or taken down like it's not anything more than maybe a traffic ticket. So that's something to consider to work with. You have the first right, the criminal court has the first right for placement, for treatment for the individual. When you get the conservatorship, you have the right to approve or disapprove treatment, placement, and medication. When you're involved in the court case, in the criminal court case, the criminal court has that right for placement. They go over you. So you're second in line. You can make your suggestions. You can go out and look at these facilities, but they have the final say where they're going to go. Next slide. These are just possible treatment programs. You have the LPS conservatorship. That's the most intense program because you have control of their medications. You get knowledge of their treatment. You don't get knowledge of when they go in therapy. That's between them and the therapist. But you have a lot more control of guiding them for recovery. And that is your job, to see that they are on the road to recovery. So if you're calling a year down the road and they're not doing any better than when they went in, there's something wrong. Call me long before that. The second one is the assisted outpatient treatment. You cannot by law be under AOT and LPS. Our AOT in Los Angeles, we are blessed. We have Linda Boyd heads that, and she is very good. I mean, if there's a problem with one of the programs or one of the teams, we can call her, not to reprimand somebody, but to be sure that they understand what they can do and what they can't do. And then we have the full service partnership, which is the lowest level of treatment. And they're okay. I'm not thrilled with them. AOT is more well-trained, and it's fewer people that they deal with in terms of each team, that they tend to do a better job, and they do work with you. But the LPS is, to me, the quickest way to get somebody on the road to recovery, because it's the only one that actually mandates medication. The other two are trying to get them to take medication. So that's really your difference. Next.
So you should know all about the medications that are being prescribed by your doctor and what their side effects are, the dosages, and when taken. But one of the ways that you can do that is go to a app or a website called drugs.com. At drugs.com or the app drugs.com, you can put the medication in there and it will provide you. One of the things that I do, we talk about keeping journals and know the medications. One of the things that I will give you an example of is that I use a database program where you have a chart, and it looks something like this. So, you're not able to read the print, so I feel safe in holding this up. But in that, you can put all the notes. And so I put notes in there as a journal, and as well, the printout from drugs.com is something that I will actually then go ahead and print out on my computer about that specific medication. And I keep it all together in a notebook like this so that anytime I can refer to my notes, look at what sort of other foods or medications might impact on that medication. For example, if they're on lithium and they drink too much coffee, you know that can have an impact on the efficacy of the medication. So that's a really excellent way, in my estimation anyway, about how to research the medication, know all about it. What is it, set out to achieve? What is the usual standard dosage range? So you can kind of get an idea of, this is the standard range, and it seems like I'm way beyond that, for my conservative. So you can contact your doctor and ask them about that. So most important is to find the best medication for clarity of mind with the least side effects. It's not always easy, but that's why we're going to keep a journal. And then you can, again, go back to your conservative psychiatrist and, have a working relationship with him and talk about your observation on this medication and your feelings on clarity of mind, and is it the best maybe medication for the conservative. So this way you're keeping a journal. You can add notes, and I love it because with Microsoft programs and even with numbers for Apple, you can put notes right into each little cell that's in there. So you can open that up and you can put the date, your observation of change and behaviors and all of that. So that's my personal recommendation. If you don't have a computer, of course, you're going to want to write all that out, but that works for me. So it's really important to stay up on top of these medications. Next slide. Oh, Gail?
Well, hold on. Yeah, yes, please. On the medications for clarity of mind, I'm going out on a limb here. And basically, if you have a migraine headache and I have a headache and I give you my Tylenol for your migraine, it isn't going to phase your migraine. You're still going to have a terrible headache or whatever, that goes with that migraine problem. When it comes to mental health and serious mental illness, medications for a person who has a mental health problem should be classified different, but they're not. Medications for a person with serious mental illness, you have to up the ante for that. So I'm going to just tell you, I've done this for like 20 some years. And in that time, people who are on Depakote, Seroquel, Ativan, Adderall, whatever, any of those, and there's plenty more, believe me. Wellbutrin, those help those with a mental health problem. They do not phase our loved ones who have a serious mental illness. And when people call me and they go, this is what they're doing, my first question is, what medication are they on? I am not a doctor, but I've done this long enough to have some idea. And when they start telling me those, I've never heard anybody say, oh, those really help. They don't. Not for serious mental illness. For serious mental illness, the medications that you're going to get the greatest probability for recovery and clarity of thinking would be Invega, which does come in a shot form. That's INVEGA. Latuda, Latuda, Clozaril, that they have two new ones, and we're getting on the new ones like Vraylar, V is in Victor, Raylar. That tends to be pretty good, but keep in mind what works for one doesn't work for another. So if you call the doctor and say, well, I know so-and-so who has the same problem as my child, and they're on this medication, it doesn't mean that medication is going to work for your loved one. It is trial and error on medications. And on Vraylar, which is relatively new, I've had 8 people give me feedback. 7 said it was a miracle drug. The 8th one said, it was disaster. So you have to just try at low dosages. You don't want to start at a high dosage. You want to start at a low dosage, see how they react to it. And if it's an injection, I don't suggest you give them the injection first. Try the pill form in a small amount, see how they respond, work it up a little bit, and then go to the injection. Another one is, I'm hearing a lot of psychiatrists tell me that they're really loving this one, Caplitar, which is relatively new. Caplyta, Caplita, and that's another one that tends to be pretty good. But it is truly trial and error. And that's the direction I would go first. The doctor may have other new medications, and they're not experimental. They've been approved. But they're learning more and more about the brain and what parts of the brain are being affected as to how they can get the people to get better. You want a medication that gives them clarity of mind with the least side effects. And when you find out what medication that works with, if it works the best for them, if you have to add another medication, then so be it. But you don't want your loved one on a variety of medications. A smorgasbord of medications does not work. Okay, next slide. Guideline for medications. Utilize that scientific method that you learned in school. You change one variable at a time. Let's say you're doing medications and you want to try a different one. You don't change what they're on. You add a small amount of the new one, providing it can be given with what they're on right now. And you're keeping your journal. What are you seeing? If you're seeing a positive change, then you can start to increase it and start to decrease the other medications. Just one at a time works best. Keep a journal on this. Today we've given them this amount of such and such medication. This is what I'm observing. And know when you will see the difference on the medications. Like in Vega, about four days you'll start to see a difference. Some people see it day 1, some maybe day 7. Just keep that in mind. Also, another note on medications, if they are on the injectable, pretty much all of your injectables, if it's a 1-month injectable, they'll say, okay, every 4 weeks you give them the injectable. If you call the pharmaceutical company that produces this, they will tell you that is our suggestion. If your loved one metabolizes quickly, they may need it every 3.5 weeks, maybe even 3 weeks, but maybe generally every 3.5 weeks. If they metabolize longer, they may be able to take it every 4.5 weeks or 5 weeks. Your journal is instrumental in determining when they need that injectable. If you see them getting agitated before it's time to take the medication and I'm not going to take it and this and that, and you have to coerce them and work with them to get them to go take it, chances are they have to take it earlier. So these are things that as a conservator is extremely important for you to know. And remember, when let's say they're due for their shot and they start not making sense, write those down, do not correct them. Because next time when that time comes, they're not going to be saying anything to you. And that is how you know where their mind is. Jim, you want to add anything?
No, I know that in the chat, somebody was saying that their daughter was not compliant to medication and wouldn't take it. And that is one of the key components of why you would want to have a conservatorship, because while they're on a conservatorship, they cannot refuse medications. Other than that, I don't know, bribe them. That's I've heard that actually from one of the attorneys that teaches various segments of conservatorship issues. So, other than that, I don't know of how you get somebody to be compliant if they're not on medications.
Yeah. Just one more thing I'd like to add. When you're working with the doctors believe they're gods. So you have to be pretty careful, pretty PC how you talk with them. And one good thing to do is say, Dr. So-and-so, I've been keeping a record of their behavior on the medications. And I've been reading about this other medication. What do you think if we try a small dosage? I will continue to keep the records and I will give you the feedback, what I'm observing. Doctors like that a lot and they tend to work with you on that. But keep in mind, some doctors I wouldn't pay 2 cents for. I've had one doctor tell the mother, all medications are the same. It doesn't matter what they're on. Well, they changed the medication and she found a new psychiatrist, and her daughter's been working for like 20 years on the new medication, where the old one, she never would have been able to work. So you know your loved one the best. You know what works for them. And when you see it, you're going to know that this is good or not. All right, next slide. Formulary for medication. If medication is not listed in their insurance profile, you can ask the treating doctor to write a formulary to request a new medication. Medi-Cal tends to have a certain list, but if those aren't working for them, they will approve for them to have a new medication. And believe me, the formulary, the doctors want you to think that it's going to take them all night to do this. It's one page. And on that, they just write, we've tried this, this, and this, and now we're trying this. The other thing is the treating doctor, you can ask them if they have free samples to try a new medication. Then if it works, then they can write the formulary. You can talk to the doctor and call the pharmaceutical company. They will send the doctor free samples to try. So there's ways that you can get around this. Seek medications that help those with serious mental illness, and do not settle for just okay. You want your loved one back to their old self as close as you can possibly get. But a doctor will say, well, they're doing fine. Well, let me think. They've been sleeping almost 24/7. They're not bothering you. So I guess that's okay. No, it isn't. Who wants to live their life sleeping it away? Honestly, I'd rather be psychotic and have a little bit more excitement in my life than sleep my life away.
Yeah.
So you know what they should be like. Don't accept just okay. There are a lot of medications that you can try till you find the right one that gets them back, that works for them. Their brain chemistry is not the same as another person's brain chemistry. So until you find that chemical that goes in their brain that's going to work for them, you just have to keep trying. Okay, next slide. Oh, Jim, I'm sorry. Did you want to add?
No, that's fine. You've covered it. You nailed it.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So, I'm sorry. I think this slide and the next slide, I think they might be flipped. So I'm going to start with the next slide, because we're going to talk about placement and treatment at the beginning of the conservatorship. When the conservatorship is established, the clients are usually in a hospital setting because they've been hospitalized on a hold, because that's the only way to get the conservatorship. So when the court grants the conservatorship, the client's going to have to stay in a hospital, and if appropriate, and the level of care that is being recommended is in a locked facility, usually at IMD, the hospital will submit a referral to the intensive care division for that locked bed. ICD will review the records that were sent to them as to why the client needs that level of care. This is where it's going to be very important for you to keep on top of it, because the client, your loved one, they could potentially get better to a point that they look stabilized, and the hospital can then recommend for them to go to an even lower setting like a ERS or a boarding care. So you kind of want to be on top of that the referral to ICD for that locked placement is still there. When you're, it's also very important that you don't take them home if you think that they need to be in a locked setting, that they remain at the hospital, because once they leave that hospital setting, then they're not going to be able to go back. We can only go lower. So they're not going to be eligible for that bed. So it's very important that you continue to have conversations with the social worker, the doctor, so that the client can remain at the facility, at the hospital.
Liliana, if I can just make a comment on this one. I had a hospital one time tell the family to take them home. We've applied for an IMD, Institute for Mental Disease. So take them home. When a bed becomes available, we'll let you know, and then you can take them there. If the family had taken that loved one home, they would never be eligible for the IMD. You have to go from a locked facility to a locked facility. So this is why keeping that journal, who says what, is vital. Okay.
Correct. You kind of lose your place in line, because your loved one is not going to be the only one in the waiting list. The wait list for IMDs is very long, so it's very important that they remain there. However, during the course of the treatment at the hospital, it is very possible that your client can stabilize because they've been medication compliant, they've engaged in the treatment that the hospital provides in regards to mental health, and they could go to a lower level of care, which for me, for a public guardian, we don't usually go straight to a boarding care. We like them to be in between the ERS, which is called an enriched residential facility, because they still have structure like an IMD does. There's 24/7 care there. There's medication distribution. There's therapists, social workers on site. However, they're able to leave the facility. But, that's you working with the treatment team to ensure that that's what you would like as the conservator, and that you feel that it's best. If a boarding care or ERS is not your preferred placement, then you as a conservator have the right to refuse that level of care. You can express your wishes to them and relate to them why they still need to be stabilized. They have a history of drug use. They have a history of AWOLing and walking away, or homelessness, that, will show that they are not going to remain in an open setting. So please advocate for your loved one. And if necessary, contact ICD and let them know that they're trying to discharge before time, that they're not ready yet.
Liliana, what is ICD?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's I don't know if you remember CRM, countywide resource management.
Yeah.
They've changed their name to ICD now, Intensive Care Division. So Intensive Care Division for DMH, they're the ones who handle all the contracted IMD beds for LA County, and also the ERS facilities. They do have some locked skilled nursing facilities too, but I'm just going to assume here that most of your loved ones are younger adults that would require a locked facility. Myths are for people who are older, 65.
I just want to add, Department of Mental Health have the habit of changing names and titles and things like that, just to keep us on our toes.
Right. They're probably going to change it down the line to something else.
I think you're right.
And I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with the enhanced residential facility. They look like boarding cares. If anybody's familiar with boarding cares, they look like boarding cares. However, these facilities do provide on-site groups. The therapists come there to give them therapies. There's an assigned social worker. They do have the psychiatrists and psychologists come there to give a medication if necessary, injectables, but they do have nursing on staff to provide the medication. A boarding care, there's really no supervision like that. Clients can go in and out. There's nobody there providing any mental health treatment. So if you're going to put your person in a boarding care, make sure that they're attached to an FSP so that they can continue to receive mental health treatment with a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and then they have an assigned case manager. So now treatment and placement via jail. So if your loved one is a justice-involved individual and a doubt has been declared in their criminal case, the usual course of placement for that individual is going to be at a state hospital. So the state hospitals that are usually used are Patton in San Bernardino and Metropolitan State Hospital. The course of treatment for somebody who has been found mentally incompetent is a maximum of 2 years. And that could vary depending on the severity of their mental illness. If the treatment team at the state hospital find that the client is not going to be restored to competency, then they're going to be returned back to the county jail for because they weren't able to learn enough in their competency restoration so that they can move forward with their criminal case. But that probably is a different training altogether because it could get quite complicated. And I'll be happy to answer any questions if people have them at the Q&A session.
If I can just make a comment, somebody up in the questionnaire said, how long are they in an IMD? Any of these facilities or any treatment, you can't state exactly how long a person is going to be there because each person is individual and each person recovers at a different rate. And a lot depends on what medication and what therapy they're giving them. Generally speaking, and correct me on this, Liliana, in an IMD, they're about between 4 to 8 months, but sometimes longer. People have been in there in a locked facility because their illness is so bad that we don't have the medications that are helping them at this time. I think the longest I ever heard was about 8 years, but most of them are out before a year is older. It has come along. I mean, correct me on that if I'm not quite.
And you're right. Everybody is different. Everybody, recovers at a different rate. So their length at the IMD is going to be dependent on them. Are they engaged in their treatment? Are they taking their medication? Each of them are going to have different goals that they need to accomplish to be able to leave the facility. So it's going to be very individually dependent. Nobody has the same length of time set for them. But some people are very chronic and it does take them much longer to get engaged in their treatment.
Jim?
Okay. So the normal movement through treatment facilities, the IMD, Institute for Mental Disease, also known as a lockdown facility. It is one level. You have an enhanced residential housing, which is a secure facility. And then you have a board and care, which is the least restrictive setting. Board and care, as most of you know, is pretty much a place where your loved one can stay, and they provide the medication every day for them and their food and so forth. But you can't go from a less restrictive placement upwards to a higher level. You have to go sideways. So you would transfer from a locked facility to a locked facility, or a unlocked facility to another unlocked facility. For example, here you must go from a hospital or jail to another lockdown setting. You can't go uphill. It can be the same or less, but you can't go from lesser to a higher, more restrictive placement for care. Next slide. The doctor can request the court to remove you as the conservator.
Yeah, that's Liliana.
Oh, I'm very sorry. I didn't notice that.
No, you can do it.
No, Lily.
Okay.
Jump on it. We gotta give you something to do here.
Oh, no, we want to work you, Liliana.
All right.
Yeah,
no,
we get our
okay.
money's worth.
Okay, so yes, that is true. The doctor can request through a letter to the court that they remove you as a conservator if they find that you are unreasonable. However, that would still come to public guardian so that we could do the investigation. So we would find out from you, the private conservator, what is going on before we make our recommendation to the court. A lot of times, if the doctors are being challenged, they don't like that, they can say that you are being a difficult person and try to get you removed, which is why the investigation by the public guardian is very important when we make our recommendation. You'd also, as a private conservator, if you're not getting along with the doctor, you can request that a new psychiatrist, medical doctor be given to your loved one for the treatment. Not everybody's going to get along. Everybody has different personalities. But if you're just asking questions about your loved one's treatment, that's a reasonable ask as the conservator. Also, the doctors aren't the only ones that can ask for that request. Social workers, case managers, they can also ask. So if we've had a lot of requests for private conservators to be removed, and those are usually because the private conservators don't respond to the treatment team, aren't going to the individual treatment meetings that they have quarterly. They're refusing to sign off on medications. Those are usually the requests that we get. So as a private conservator, you should be involved with the treatment. And if they do have these type of meetings to discuss your loved one's treatment, the progress, the prognosis, you should attend.
Okay, the conservatee, when your loved one goes under the conservatorship, they have temporary restrictions. The right to drive a car, that is temporary. You can request, if you are the private conservator, for them to get the right to drive a car back. When you feel it's appropriate, you write a letter to their treating doctor. The doctor has a form, which is in that booklet at the beginning that we talked about, fills out the form, it's given to the court. The court will approve or disapprove for the person to drive the car. Then they go to DMH, and DMV. The DMV might request that they do an interview with your loved one. But they can get the right to drive a car, because remember, we're trying to get them well, get them onto the road for recovery, and get them so that they're no longer gravely disabled. The right to enter contracts, that can also be given back, because if they're doing a job where they're selling something, they're signing a contract. They may need that right back. Also, where they live. As the person gets well, they can make a lot of their own decisions, and you should work with them together. And they might say, look, I want an apartment. I want to live with a friend of mine or something in this apartment. And that's perfectly fine. I don't normally suggest that you have your loved one come home with you, but there are extenuating circumstances where they probably should or need to. But if you can keep them in an apartment, a boarding care, or something like that, that probably is more preferable, because one, it keeps you so that you have your life and they learn how to stand on their own 2 feet. It's kind of like you send your kid to college, they can wash their clothes, get their own food, and all this other stuff. They come home, hey mom, there's my dirty clothes in the laundry room, and when's dinner? They revert back. So that's one of the reasons for getting them to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. The more permanent restriction, and I believe this is federal for 5 years, the right to shoot and possess guns. And that's probably a good one, because at that point, when they get mad at you, you don't want them doing target practice on you. Okay, next slide. To reinstate the rights of the conservatorship, I just went over that with driving a car. And they do give it back to the person if the person's doing very well. And if you've found a good medication that works for them, it's amazing how you get your loved one back. Now, the one thing that they many times have trouble with is processing information. It might take them a little bit longer to process information on their road to recovery. That's why that cognitive therapy is so important. It exercises the brain muscles. Okay, the right to enter contracts, we also talked about that too. Next slide. Liliana?
Oh, I'm so sorry. So the conservatorship has to be renewed yearly if appropriate. I would recommend that the renewal process gets filed early, so that you don't forget, because if you don't file it and there's no hearing in time, the conservatorship is going to terminate. And as you all know, it's very difficult to get a conservatorship for your loved one. That being said, you are going to need the doctor to prepare and give you a declaration that needs to be filed, indicating that your loved one continues to be gravely disabled because of their mental illness.
Liliana, I have a question on this.
Sure.
A lot of people have gotten on the road to recovery, they've gotten jobs, and in the past, if they said they wanted to remain under the conservatorship, the court would grant it. Are they still doing that?
Yes. If the person wants to remain on the conservatorship and they report that to their public defender and to the court will usually grant it.
Okay. And the reason why I'm asking that for many of you, many people get on the road to recovery and they've got a good job. They don't want to go back to where they were when they were sick. And they know that that can happen very easily. So if they're under the conservatorship at 5358.5, you can get them back into treatment immediately. So they might miss a week of work, maybe 2 weeks of work, but then they can go back to where they were. So a lot of people, they want to stay under that conservatorship. That's what I asked.
Yeah, a lot of times they feel like they need that additional support, and it helps them continue with their treatment. Can we go to the next one?
Well, I wanted to make a comment as well. Can we go back? It's really important that you actually start this renewal process at least 3 months early. But I will share that here in Orange County, in any event, if the person goes through this process late, what happens is the hearing date is actually after the expiration of the conservatorship, and in those cases, they will keep the conservatorship intact until the status report hearing comes to trial, and they'll move forward on it. I haven't heard of anybody here in Orange County actually losing the conservatorship as long as you apply before the expiration. But it's risky. You may have the public defender's office contesting that, and you'll be sweating bullets. So mark your calendars. When you get that paperwork, you want to mark something down someplace that really jars your recall to file these things on time. And that's all I wanted to share. Thank you. Next slide.
Liliana, we don't have that in LA. They because you all have to do your investigation, and if you don't have enough time, then that conservatorship will terminate. Am I correct?
So for cases that are under the public guardian, we usually know ahead of time when the conservatorship is going to expire. So the case managers will go out and see the client, do our report ahead of the hearing date. But in the event that we don't file in time, we can always file it, request that the case be dismissed without prejudice, so we can refile it and it extends our time.
Okay, but for a person or an individual who's conservator, if they don't request it in time and y'all haven't done your work, then they will dismiss the case. Is that correct?
Are you talking about it as a private conservator?
As a private conservator, yes.
We don't do the reports for private. We only do the initial one, the initial investigation into conservatorship. The renewals, that's going to be on the private conservator to do the filing, not on public guardian.
Right. So you've got to do it on time, because they are dismissing those cases if you're the private conservator. Orange County does theirs, implements the laws a little bit different. LA will tend to dismiss the case. So 3 months, Connie Drexler has said, file 3 months in advance to give everybody time to do what they have to do to get the work done. Okay?
Right. This Judge Jaskell, it appears that she's very pro-client. So if the client, is challenging the conservatorship, it's best that everybody has kind of all the information, their proof that the client needs a conservatorship well ahead of time, just so we can continue to extend the conservatorship.
Okay. Did we miss one? Can you go back, Eric? Yeah. Gravely disabled, that's Liliana? You and Jim.
Jim, does Jim want to take this one, or should I?
No, we can both do it. Gravely disabled. In order to be deemed, well, and first of all, as we had said earlier, in order to obtain a private LPS conservatorship over the person, that person must meet certain criteria, and that's called gravely disabled, which means that individual cannot fulfill their basic needs of food, clothing, or shelter. At one point in time, there was a misunderstanding. They were saying that they had to not have capacity to provide all three, but it's any one of those. If they do not have the capacity to provide for their own food, clothing, or shelter, then they are deemed to be gravely disabled. Basic needs addresses the safety and the health of the individual. Basically, if they can't care for themselves, then their health and their safety is at risk.
And it has to make sure that it's in your declarations that it's because of their mental illness. Because remember, this is the LPS conservatorship for mentally ill individuals.
As I mentioned yesterday in the meeting, I believe, even the patients' rights website of California makes that same statement, that they have to meet their basic needs themselves, or they're considered gravely disabled. So that's really the criteria you have to meet in obtaining a conservatorship. Next slide, Liliana.
So the client has two options at the renewal and even at the initial. It's a court hearing where the judge decides, or a jury trial. The court will ask the client which option they want at the first hearing. If they choose the court hearing, then the judge is going to be the one to make the decision as to whether or not the conservatorship gets renewed. If the client picks a jury trial, then it's going to be 12 people that are going to decide. And with a jury trial, it's very similar to a criminal trial where there has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. The client, your loved one, at either of these type of trials, they have the right to contest the conservatorship. They're going to have to inform the court of what their plan is to meet their basic needs. Where are they going to live? What are they going to do for food? How are they going to get clothing? Are they going to continue with the mental health treatment? Are they going to continue with medication? Do they even have insight? Do they believe that they have a mental illness? So all those things, they're going to have to let the court know and prove to either the 12 people or to the judge. So it's also important to note that if your loved one is presenting well, is talking in a coherent, articulate manner, that it might come across to the court and to the jury that they no longer need the conservatorship and that they've recovered enough where they're no longer gravely disabled. So you also have to be aware that should be like in the back of your mind. How is your client presenting at the time of the hearing? Do they look well enough? Are they presenting well enough? Is this going to cause a conservatorship to get terminated? So it's very important also that if your loved one is going to be contesting, that you notify the psychiatrist, because there's going to be a need for them to testify as to why they're gravely disabled.
Somebody asked up in the thing, do you need an attorney? You can hire an attorney, but my suggestion in LA, for sure, Los Angeles, is you fill out the paperwork, you submit it, and when you go to court, they will provide an attorney for your loved one, and county council represents you, and they will make that decision.
County council represents public guardian.
Pardon?
County council represents public guardian.
Well, when the individual goes and when the private conservator goes, they don't have an attorney who represents them.
So at the initial, like when the conservatorship first gets handed over to the private conservator, at that time, the private conservator can ask that the court appoint them an attorney free of charge. And, and at the renewal, that's going to be the attorney who's going to be with you at the renewal.
Okay, if you don't get an attorney at the initial LPS, then when you go back in for the renewal, can you get an attorney appointed at that time?
You can certainly ask the judge to have somebody appointed to you, and the judge will make that decision. I don't see why they wouldn't. I mean, they did. If they do it at the initial, they should do it in subsequent renewals.
Because you don't normally have to hire an attorney. In fact, most attorneys that you would hire, they know how to do probate conservatorship. They'll take your money, but when they get to LPS court, they have no clue what they're doing. Right. And they can screw it up, believe me. So if you do hire an attorney, be sure they handle LPS conservatorships. And Terry Wasserman used to be an LPS conservatorship attorney, and bless his heart, he passed away about a couple weeks ago. So we don't have him anymore. But the court should appoint somebody for you, so you should not have to pay for an attorney. And I would suggest that you use the court appointed attorney because they are educated for LPS, and that's important.
Yes, and the court usually has like their own panel of attorneys there that help the private conservators. One I'm very familiar with is Ellen Finkelberg.
Yes.
So she would be one of the court appointed attorneys for a private conservator.
And she is excellent. In fact, you can even request her. She's absolutely an amazing attorney. Very good.
So I'd like to speak on Orange County and how it's done there. Primarily when you go down to the court and you've submitted your documents from your 2 doctors, you get a court date to appear. It's called a status hearing. By that time, the public defender will have contacted your conservatee and asked them if they're going to contest conservatorship or not. If they are in fact going to contest conservatorship, when you go to the status hearing, you as the conservator can ask for a continuance of the hearing, and that the court provide you an attorney. Somebody said that, Lee Blumen in Orange County in the chat room, I saw it pop up for a second. Lee Blumen is available, but you can't just call him up and say, I want you to represent me for free. He has to be appointed by the courts. There's somebody named Sandra Skane here in Orange County that was being funded through a nonprofit from one of the universities. And they actually provided all the representation for the parents in these meetings. And then that funding stopped. So now the courts are supplying from a list of attorneys that are volunteering to represent the families in these matters. Sandra Skane's still available if the individual that's requesting a conservatorship is 60 years of age or older, because that's the way the nonprofit that she's working under now operates. But if you're not 60 years of age, then you're going to have to depend on the court to provide an attorney to you, and then they'll represent you in court. In Orange County, you cannot represent yourself. You must have an attorney. So you don't want to have to pay for that. The courts will provide it. Thank you.
I do want to make one last point on this. Your loved ones, when they get represented by the public defender, and if they let their public defender know that they want to get off the conservatorship, just know that the public defender is going to do everything in their power to try to get your loved one off the conservatorship, because that's their role in representing your loved one. They're not there for you. They're not there for public guardian. They're there solely to help out your loved one in the conservatorship process.
And some of them will actually try to trick you. If your loved one doesn't meet the criteria of being gravely disabled, they're off conservatorship. So in other words, the public guardian's office called me and said, if your son is taken off of conservatorship, are you still going to help him with all of his needs? And I said, if he's taken off of conservatorship, then he doesn't need me to help him with his needs. Primarily, you're going to say, oh, sure, if he's off conservatorship, I'm more than willing to help him out, if he needs groceries, this, that. And right there, they're going to say, well, the parents are going to provide all these services of food, clothing, or shelter. And so therefore, they're not going to meet criteria. And it sometimes fails. I had Jim Harvey, who was a leading attorney, actually use that because he was representing the conservatee, and he was still deemed gravely disabled. But be careful. No, as Liliana said, the public defender is not your friend. when they want to talk to you, and they did ask me, can I talk to you? And I said, I don't see that that's in my best interest. I really don't want to talk to you. And then she popped a question, and I said, you know, if he's taken off conservatorship, then obviously he's not going to need my help or assistance in any way. All right.
Sometimes what I've seen is they'll try to kind of negotiate. And it's usually when it comes to placement issues, when they're in a locked setting and they want to go somewhere where it's more open, they can go in and out. They'll kind of try to negotiate where, okay, well, the client will stay on conservatorship if you are willing to move them to a lower level of care, even though that's not the appropriate setting for them. So just watch out for kind of those tactics from the public defender.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jim?
Well, it does have my name on it, doesn't it? There's a website that I recommend everybody in this meeting go to and read through. It's outpostforhope.org. Again, that's outpostforhope.org. And in that, it will actually provide all the information you need to know to find a person that's missing that has a mental health condition. The laws say that because the person meets criteria of being disabled, there is no 24-hour waiting period or anything like that. If they're missing for minutes and you don't know where they went and you are concerned about that, you actually have the legal right to call your police department and ask them to initiate a missing persons report. You want to provide a copy of your conservatorship paper to the police. And in the Outpost for Hope, they used to have this really informative video that played for quite a while. And they were telling parents that really at some point in time, you should take DNA samples from your loved ones. Maybe it's their hairbrush and you get some hair and keep it in a dry envelope. That basically there are tens of thousands of John and Jane Does buried across our nation that nobody knows who they are. And there's so many missing persons that are on our streets with a mental health condition that they just took off. I've actually had out-of-state people find me through that website and ask me to assist them. If this happens to you, just know that, well, in this case, the mom was not even a conservator, but she had the legal right under California law to file a missing persons report. And it took a chief of police from another police department to educate the other police department that she could do that. So know that, understand how your best chances of finding your loved one can be by going to that website, outpostforhope.org. Okay, and I think that's really important. Again, as the slide says, as an independent adult, they don't need to be under conservatorship. If they have a mental health condition, then they meet criteria for that missing persons report to be filed immediately. But there's national databases that cover this. And I've actually worked with a family here not long ago where her loved one ended up out in New Mexico, and we're able to get her back, and she's gone again. So it's trying, and at least if you have some DNA available, if they show up somewhere and something has happened to them, at least you'll have closure. So many families don't have closures, and some are just maybe wanting to take off to try to get away, doing something and then come back. But you never know. Some people have a chronic situation where they refer to them as frequent flyers. They just take off all the time. And I've dealt with families and trying to get them back home. It's very frustrating for parents.
Let me just make a suggestion. If your loved one is not under the conservatorship, if they're under the conservatorship, when the police find them, they'll ask you, what do you want us to do? Take them to the hospital. But if they're not under the conservatorship, The police can tell you, we found them, they're doing well, they're okay, or whatever like that. They kind of call in hip and they say, we can't tell you where they are. But what you can do is say to the police, look, I'd like to thank you very much for what you're doing. If you can tell me what restaurant or what is around there, I would like to buy you lunch or coffee or something at Starbucks. I'd like to do something for you to thank you. They can tell you where they are. They cannot tell you, even though your loved one's standing right next to them, where that loved one is. So kind of just think a little bit and offer to do something special for the police, and they might tell you, you know, can you tell me what the cross street signs are where you are? Not where my loved one is, but where they are. And that they can tell you. Okay, next slide.
So leaving the state of California, if you have a court-ordered conservatorship here in California, it's not going to be valid in any other state. California currently does not have reciprocity with any other states when it comes to LPS. Probate is different. There are some states that do have that, but not for LPS. If your loved one happens to go AWOL and leave the state of California, definitely do the missing persons report, because if they happen to be found in a different state and they call you, let them know that the person has been missing, to notify the police, and so that they can transport them back to California. If you happen to need to leave California for a wedding, some life event, you need to ask permission from the court. It's very important that the court knows where they're at, because in case they go AWOL, missing from that state, it needs to be reported back to the court, because that could potentially end up having the case terminated.
Okay, we're basically, we want to thank you for your determination and endurance in helping your loved one. I will tell you that there's nothing that's more traumatic and difficult than dealing with a loved one in your family that's dealing with a mental health condition. So this is
No, you're not.
Basically when you think that you just can't take anymore. And I know it's just devastating to families with the types of things that they have to endure. The Navy SEALs model is that you can still give 10% more when you think that you've hit the wall. You still can give at least 10% more effort. That said, the Navy SEALs haven't walked our road, have they? But keep strong. You want to take care of yourself. You're your loved one's strongest chance for recovery. Kind of the old saying is that if you're in an airplane and the cabin depressurizes and they have to drop down, while they're doing that, the oxygen mask will fall down out of the ceiling. So if you're sitting there with a child next to you, you always put the oxygen mask on the child first, because if you were to, on yourself first, because if you were to pass out while you're trying to get a mask on your child, then neither one of you will have a mask. So you put your own mask on first, and then you can get the mask onto your child. And this is the same kind of philosophy, is that you have to stay strong, because if you don't, if you buckle under, you're not going to have the energy or the mental capacity even to take care of somebody that has such needs of care and so forth. So number one is yourself. Take care of yourself. Get counseling if you need it. Talk to somebody. Don't be a hermit. It's not easy. As Gail and I have a lot of families that call us, and I can remember a mom saying, I come home from work and my son is up on the balcony just screaming all sorts of things that don't make any sense, and all the other tenants are coming out to see what on earth is going on. And she tells me about how many apartments she's been kicked out of. There's so many moms out here that are real soldiers. The dads cut and run sometimes. They don't always stick around. And these moms are super moms. You know, they're out there, they're taking care of maybe several kids at once and somebody else with a mental health, and it's too much to endure. So you need to find care for yourself. You need to get somebody that will help you with it, whether it's a psychiatrist, psychologist, a therapist, a friend. You've got to keep yourself strong in that way. And, you know, pain that is shared is half a pain. So be strong, stay in tune with NAMI, go to the family-to-family meetings, and you'll get through it. You'll be able to continue helping your loved one. Next slide. So, you know, what we do here today is basically taking special funds for all the different persons in NAMI, what is involved and what they have to do. And so only if you're in a financial situation to where you can afford to make a donation, we want you to at least consider donating to NAMI Urban Los Angeles. This is their address. Again, you can actually go to Google if you don't have this down in time, and Google NAMI Urban Los Angeles, and then you can make a donation there. What we're asking that if you actually do that, put a note in there that this is for LPS conservatorship program, and that helps to cover this program's needs. We really appreciate you coming today. Just Gail and I have been doing this for a few years, and we'll continue doing this as long as we can.